the day. My name is John Kamara. So we're going to have a quick overview about Africa and what is happening in the African continent at the minute. So the idea is to just get a landscape understanding of what is changing in the African continent. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to the news have heard about the problems in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and a few other countries as well. But just trying to give you some snippets of how, why, and what are the solutions to help mitigate some of this problem. So the first thing we find is the fact that Africa is still a very young continent in terms of regulation. And it's important that, a lot of operators understand how young this continent is when it comes to gaming regulation. Most countries in Africa have been regulating any type of remote gaming only for about 3-4 years. Probably the oldest regulation is from South Africa. But if you go from East to West Africa, maybe Nigeria has been regulated for 8 years. Kenya, remote gambling has been about 5-6 years. Zambia is only 2 years old. They just got a regulator. So when we expect these markets to be as mature or as developed as what we have in some countries in Europe, it's actually a disservice to those markets. And I think it's important that we take that into consideration as operators who want to go into these markets to understand that a lot of these regulators are grappling with the problem of what to do. Now, when they're grappling with the problem of what to do, the second thing that happens is you get what we call cowboy operators who come from all over the world, and basically because they know that the regulators are grappling with what to do, they basically influence what happens in the market, or they operate with, most jurisdictions. When it comes to regulation, the only two things they tell you is license fee and what the tax is. That's all. So that's the whole regulation. And that's not regulation. That is just, the fees that you have to pay to the government. But, so that obviously means that we have a problem of regulator, politician, and operators. And then also you throw in the problem of religion, which quite a number of countries still have the same problem of religion. But if we circle back for a minute and we look at the dynamic growth happening in Africa with a number of sectors, this year alone, in the fintech sector in Africa, we've had about almost $6.3 billion worth of investment, which is unprecedented, and a lot of it are small startup companies across the continent. It's never happened before, because a lot of these are platform critical mass-driven businesses. And what does that mean? That means it has a knock-on effect on entertainment, and gaming falls on the entertainment. So people have more resources to be able to be interested in gaming. So the idea then is that it is truly an emerging market, because the opportunities for companies to come in, quickly accelerate and grow, it's there, but also the opportunity and the problem of disasters based on irresponsible gambling is also there at the same time. So we'll take a specific example, which I'm sure you've all heard was Kenya. Now, Kenya regulated online gambling about 5-6 years ago, but if anybody is doing business in Kenya or has done business in Kenya, you still find that the regulation is still very much land-based, even though people operate online. So in that situation, you have a license that is given to you, which is just a bookmaker's license, that allows you to just do gaming without any clear definitions. So, and obviously this means that, and even the taxation, just only recently, with all the problems that happened, that they started looking at changing translation. So which means basically the regulator also was put there from a different industry and has no idea. Now they've just come into gaming from, I don't know, any sector they were in, because it's a political appointment or a position. So you get situations where the regulator is also learning on the job. And the power doesn't stop with the regulator. The regulator is also there to execute the power of the politicians and the government. So he is grappling on one side, how do I help this industry stabilize? And the other side is being pulled by the politicians saying, this is what you must do. Because we believe there's a lot of money in gambling, which it's true. So that then creates a situation where you expect some of the operators who come into the market to self-regulate. But as we know, that never happens. Operators will never, 95% of the time, self-regulate themselves when they see the wild, wild west opportunity. So most operators, and this effectively turned into a situation of irresponsible gambling. So from the situation of irresponsible gambling, the politicians got involved, and once the politician and religion gets involved, then the whole situation gets out of hand. Then you have the situation of, people talking about kids gambling or gambling companies having betting outlets outside schools, outside churches. There's just no, the operators themselves do not have any sense of sustainability for the gaming market. They've just seen a clear opportunity, and most of the operators that we've seen in Africa initially are technically what we would call cowboy operators, who probably are not licensed in any of the proper jurisdictions, Malta, Isle of Man, Alderney, UK. They come from other places. So now they have no interest in the sustainable growth of the market. They're just interested in what can we get now and how do we do that without necessarily, and they run their businesses from very remote offshore places. So, and also the second part is also, in most of these countries, you don't have locals who are actively involved in ownership and driving the key growth of these industries. So again, it means that when the country looks at the value of gaming companies are making a lot of money, very little taxation is being paid because so many different reasons are happening there. There's not enough local involvement, local ownership. All the money is going out. What is the value for the country? Already gaming is termed as the devil in some countries, and then you have all these other problems, and then you have a regulator that is still grappling with, how do I regulate this market? Do I copy and paste from Malta? Do I copy and paste from Alderney? Do I copy and paste from Isle of Man? So all these questions put together in a cooking pot causes the problems that we have in some of these markets. But the underlying factor is that these markets are still extremely new, viable market opportunities. If you look at some of the numbers in some of these markets where, again, we're talking about Kenya, 30-40% capitalization in terms of real market entry. Nigeria only just really started going purely into online. As of 2 years ago, you couldn't do business in Nigeria as a gaming company if you didn't have a retail outlet. But now, all of a sudden, because more mobile infrastructure is happening, the cost of data is being reduced, you now have operators who are purely going online, and they're making money. So you can see the dynamic change and the trend in change in a number of these markets, which is allowing for the growth that we all predicted 5 years ago that it would happen to happen. But one of the key problems that we are facing is not even regulation. Because the regulators will get there, and they will learn, and a lot of the regulators in Africa are actually more friendly than regulators in Europe, where I used to work before. You can actually walk to regulators in Africa, have discussions with them to discuss and, figure things out. Most countries here, you can't do that. It's either this way or that way. I mean, Holland, for example, they've been talking for how many years? So I think there is a misconception in a myopic approach in how we look at Africa in terms of gaming. It's not Africa, it's each country to its own value. And there's 54 countries. Ethiopia just started gaming. Ethiopia is one of the largest economies in Africa. And the regulator is just a regulator. So again, he has to learn of how do I regulate this market? How do I create the opportunity? So going back to the key problem, it's irresponsible gambling. When a new market is opening up, and we have operators who basically do not have any sense of responsibility to the market and do not have any responsibility to advertise it. I mean, take the case of Uganda for a second. When you get out the airport in Kampala, everywhere else you go, there's a billboard, there's some gaming operator. And also, there is a consistent war between the gaming operators, so there's actually no real cohesion. So now you have a question where the problem with the market and the operator spills over into the politicians. So irresponsible gambling is something that I really want to focus on here for an emerging market like Africa. The first thing that we see happening is we see operators who have no compliance with even the current regulation as it stands. Then two, we also see a problem where operators do not necessarily care who and what they sell to. That's the second problem. Then you also have a problem where you also have the same operators who don't necessarily pay any taxes to the economy. So most operators say that they run on a loss, because there is no monitoring, there is no effective control. I mean, the enforcement is lukewarm at best, because how do you enforce somebody when you can't really trace back where their jurisdiction comes from? So all these problems put together, we see the continent that is booming, literally, with opportunities, and these are tangible opportunities, because why I'm giving you an example of other sectors, for you to understand the growth that is happening, in the African context. And because more people are now having access to disposable income, which obviously means more people have the interest to game. More people have the interest to entertain themselves. We've had more startups in Africa than ever in the past 2 years alone. We've had way more funding. We had a 23% growth in funding alone. And there's also another prediction that it's probably going to get to 47% in the next 2 years. So that money is going into the market. That money is going into young startups, young people, the people who are technically going to spend that money on something else. We have more casinos, offline casinos opening up in the African continent because people are looking for how to be entertained. So we have new markets in Ivory Coast, Senegal, now opening up their markets for other operators because they were predominantly French. So they're now opening up the market to say, okay, let us not go with this monopoly. Let us look at an open market opportunity where we can also learn something from other operators. So all these put together, we have the youngest continent in the world that Lagos, for example, by 2050 will be almost 240 million people. So that is a huge trend in growth. In terms of urbanization, a number of these cities are becoming urbanized because we see a lot of global impact funds coming into the markets. By 2065, 6 of the African cities will be 10 of the largest cities in the world in terms of population growth. We have a young population of under 17s, which means that people will grow into, compared to, I was just in Japan recently, where everybody's sort of old a bit. So if you look at all these trends, and then you look at the fact that the problem is Africa an opportunity, that is already a given fact. Yes, it is a real opportunity. And we've seen operators who've made a lot of money in the past 3-4 years. What we're not seeing is the right operators who are coming into the African market. The big operators who have jurisdiction that is enforceable. We're having conversations with quite a number of, jurisdictions, Malta, Ireland. How do we form alliances with your experience to help our regulators to create markets that are sustainable because we can actually enforce some of these problem irregularities? Because at the end of the day, our politicians will listen to expertise, will listen to the fact that gaming is not going to go away. Because effectively, when you run when you come up with different laws that make it difficult for people to provide gaming legally, what you're doing is you're sending them underground. We all know that. And then they will provide it legally, and there's nothing you can do. So we're also seeing financial institutions now beginning to work with regulators to say, okay, how do we begin to track, what we will tend to be illegal gaming from different operators around the world. So to just give you a rundown, in West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Mali, Burkina Faso, they all have regulators. They have licensing fee and they have taxations. But their regulation, when you look at it, is it a real regulation? Does it actually provide for a continuity for the market? Maybe not. If you go to East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, now Ethiopia, Burundi, they all have regulators. So all these are regulated. If you go to Southern Africa, Zambia, Mozambique, they all have regulators. So all these are, so you can't actually operate without getting some form of a license. So the first box is ticked. Yes, you can get a license. Yes, you can be regulated. Yes, you can pay some taxation. But now, the core of the problem is, let us look at the content of that regulation and who comes to apply, and how do we enforce this regulation against the problem and the opportunity that exists in the market. We had a regulator that, an operator that started in Nigeria about a year and a half ago. I'm not going to name names, but as of last month, they were doing $11 million in turnover with a 26% margin, and they're purely online. So if you don't tell me that that is an opportunity, then I would seriously debate that. So you do have, and at the same time as well, these markets are quite flexible in terms of how you market to consumers, how you provide products, how you even test products, because it is a consumption economy. So across other sectors of what is happening in Africa, over the past 3-4 years, I've worked with 7 different operators who I've brought into the African market, from helping them to license, to creating market strategy for them, to helping them with compliance, to helping, and we've seen how we've been able to create a structure for them that allows them, even when they go anywhere internationally, they can actually add the value of their African operation to their listing anywhere else they are in the world. So because their objective is, we're creating a business that allows us to also add the value into our listed entity everywhere else in the world. So it's the opportunity in Africa, I think at the minute, it's not like any other opportunity you find in any other market. There's still so many other markets in Africa that are just still emerging and that are developing it. Quite a number of small countries. So, and you can't compare Africa with LATAM Asia is already, in most cases, an emerged market, but in some cases is also very gray. So, but if you truly look at it for an opportunity for growth, and with what we're seeing, Africa is the opportunity for growth. And a number of these countries are going to drive the factors for growth in gaming over the next 4 or 5 years. We're now seeing companies who are predominantly now beginning to provide poker for the first time in the continent, which wasn't happening a few years ago. We're seeing companies now providing online casino purely as a product, without sports, without anything else. They're purely an online casino product, and they're turning over $3-4 million a month. Purely online, on mobile, with very specific type of product that is Africa-centric. And this is the other problem as well. The product that you provide also has to be very customized to deal with the issues in the market. One is the mobile phone. First, you think mobile before anything else. But when you also think mobile, you think extremely mobile and data friendly. Then you're also thinking how even your acquisition is also very mobile. And we have a massive amount of payment infrastructures that is currently happening in the continent, where we're now beginning to do a number of cross-border payment solutions. So from the African Development Bank to the Afri-Exim Bank to a number of the regional banks, we're now beginning to see a lot of interaction between seamless cross-border payments. So a brand can even have seamless cross-border brands across the different markets. We're also seeing an interoperability between mobile money and basic banking transaction, because the conversation in the continent at the moment is financial inclusion for 800 million people. So financial inclusion for 800 million people means a number of these people have to be banked. Yes, they have mobile money, but they need more access to finance, so they need to be banked, they need to be tracked. But we also have very strong KYCs, because our KYC is actually much stronger than most other markets. And I'll give you a very simple example before I close. Our KYC is tied to our mobile phone. And once you really understand the power of the mobile number, then you'd really understand how the market works. I lost my mobile number in Ireland. I grew up in Dublin. And I went to the shop and they gave me a new phone, a new SIM card, and that was it. I mean, I lost my mobile SIM card in Nigeria. It took me a week and a half to get the SIM card, because I had to go back and do my biometrics again. And they had to match it with the existing biometric that I provided. Then they had to run to see what was my name. Then I had to go back to the police and get police statements to say that and then they tied that back, because it was tied to my bank. So my mobile number was tied to my bank. Everything that I do from my mobile number on my USSD shortcode. So in that situation, once I pull the API from the mobile operator, I have the full KYC of that individual. I actually don't need to KYC that person again. Please do tell me, again, I live in Ireland, and we don't even have that level of KYC when you're just getting a mobile phone. So we are a very mobile-driven economy. And the only way that we will leapfrog all the problems we have is the mobile phone. That is why everything we build is extremely mobile-centric. And once you understand it, and even the growth of gaming in Africa, it will also be driven by the mobile phone. We have a new, I'm sure if you probably read the news lately, a few companies from China who just got an investment, 40 million, 120 million, to build fintech companies in Africa. But what they're building is ecosystems around the mobile phone, where gaming becomes just one of that ecosystem, where you already have existing customers. One company recently just got invested $40 million, but they have 72 million people who are using their ecosystem in 40 countries. So there's a huge amount of opportunity to also do partnerships that give you instant acquisition once you understand how the landscape works. But going back to the beginning of the conversation, if we don't get the right operators, and if the right operators like yourselves don't come to the market and become part of this opportunity, because also our regulators can also learn, and we've been preaching this for the past 2-3 years. Our regulators can learn from the right operators coming into the market, and also being able to advise and guide on how to actually operate, because a right operator has more to lose than somebody who just comes from a black market. And this is the key driver that I believe for growth. But the first question, is there growth in Africa? Definitely. Over the next 10 years, some of our cities will be some of the fastest growing markets in the world. Hands down, not even in Africa. So that is happening, either you like it or not. We're seeing huge amounts of opportunity because we're a consumer-driven market, critical mass economies that are growing. So gaming is just one part of it, that's all. And people will be entertained the more money they make. The more they come out of rural communities, they look for entertainment. So gaming is entertainment to them. At the minute, people use gaming as a form of hope. But as they become more mature, gaming becomes a form of entertainment because they have other things that encompass their lives. Do we have the infrastructures? Yes, we do. We have strong payment solutions in Africa. We have a huge fintech ecosystem that is growing faster than anywhere else in the world. And that already drives seamless payments across multiple borders. Do we have the right regulation? No, we don't. Do we have the capacity to do it? Yes, with the right partnerships we do. Is there an opportunity for the right operators to come and position themselves to help and also at the same time make money? Yes, there is. So it's a question of will and desire against conversations. So the will to desire to explore a new market, because I hear operators saying, we're going to LATAM, we're going to LATAM. It's like, what is the difference between LATAM and Africa? Honestly, we have 54 countries. How many countries do they have? We have some of the largest countries, the largest economies. You know, it's just understanding that the opportunity is there, and sometimes there's a disconnect when people think about Africa, and so when they hear one news. So yes, there's a problem in Kenya, but it's like any other market. These problems are teething problems. And as the teething problems change, the ecosystem changes, and also the Kenyan regulators and police went to London recently to meet the Gambling Commission to learn. They've decided it's time for us to go learn something. It's time for us to go learn something. Come to Africa and learn something at the same time. My time is up. Thank you very much.